All right, thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about the energy source of the future, fusion. Some say it's the ultimate energy source. And today we have three guests that are going to talk to us about fusion from many different angles. So, we have Kiyoshi here. He's going to talk about fusion from the perspective of a supplier. Then we have Bob. He's going to talk about fusion from the perspective of a company that's actually building the reactors. And then we have Beau, the capitalist. How are we going to fund these enormous projects? So with that said, perhaps we can get like a quick introduction, 2 minutes or less, on each of you and what you're doing. Kiyoshi, you want to start right there?
Yes, I'm Kiyoshi Seiko, Vice President at Kyoto Fusioneering. Then we are working on fusion reactor part, not the fusion reaction itself, but we are supporter who are supplying key components of system, such as the Commonwealth Fusion System or other fusion developers. So we are differently, uniquely positioned in this market. And fusion is definitely changing the world. So I'm very happy to come here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Bob Mumgaard. I'm CEO and co-founder of Commonwealth Fusion Systems, PhD plasma physicist from MIT, which is where Commonwealth Fusion Systems spun out about 5 years ago. We're the largest fusion company. We're about 450 employees, raised about $2 billion. And based on the belief that fusion could be a really game-changing technology for the energy transition, for sustainability, as we repower the world. And we're currently in Boston, Massachusetts, building a prototype fusion machine that will, in here about 3 years, be producing more power out than in for the first time from a commercial machine, on the way to a power plant in the early 2030s.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I'm Beau Laskey with SVB Capital. We're one of the 4 business units of Silicon Valley Bank, based out of San Francisco in Menlo Park. We're really the bank to the innovation economy. And then with my group, we manage about $10 billion of outside capital, and we invest in new innovative startups, ideas, and companies.
Right. And I'm James from Coral Capital, and we basically our mission is to invest in the next legendary companies out of Japan. So we're looking for the next Sonys, the next Toyotas, and with that mission, we actually invested in Kyoto Fusioneering. And funny enough, Kiyoshi used to be a Coral team member, yeah, and he liked the company so much that he actually joined. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I mentioned earlier that fusion is often described as the ultimate energy source. And but what does that mean, right? We're seeing fusion in the news now. Is this going to be like the holy grail? We hear all kinds of things from all kinds of people, but here we have the experts. So I was wondering, Kiyoshi, Bob, can either of you tell us what is the reason behind all this excitement?
Yeah, so I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So what fusion is fusion is the reaction that happens inside the stars. So inside the stars, tiny amounts of hydrogen is combined under huge pressure, very high temperatures, like 100 million degrees. And in that process produces helium and enormous amounts of energy, about 200 million times more energy per reaction than burning something, which is why the stars can be billions of years old without burning out. This reaction of combining light elements together is the opposite of what we associate today with nuclear power, which is the splitting of heavy elements into lighter ones. They both convert a lot of energy. In the case of fusion, the fuel, what you would put into the power plant, a single glass of water would have the fuel to power a city like Tokyo for like a year. And it's fuel that everyone has access to. It's globally distributed. No one has a hegemony over the resource. So that's very powerful from a security standpoint. In this same reaction, you can turn it on and you can turn it off. In fact, the hard part is getting it to go at all, which means that it defaults to off, which is very important when we think about safety. It is also a reaction that doesn't produce long-lived nuclear waste. There's no leftovers. The leftover is helium, like in party balloons. So that has a big impact on the legacy that the technology would leave. And when you can turn it on and turn it off, it also means that you can run it overnight which means that it isn't subject to the ups and downs of the resources of the wind or the waves or the sun. And so this is why fusion is often seen as the solution. It is a solution that fuel doesn't run out, that anyone could use where and when you need it, that doesn't have the long-lived legacy, and produces the same power of the stars, which is also kind of why it's in science fiction. But here on this panel, we're talking a bit about how it's coming down and becoming a real technology that could be part of the energy mix in the next few decades.
Right, so you mentioned energy mix, and I think that's a really important word to kind of unpack. How does fusion compare to some of the other energy sources? Because solar, for example, we have a fusion reactor in the sky. Why don't we harness that? Solar technology is getting cheaper and more viable day by day. Kiyoshi, why would we go with fusion as opposed to solar, for example, or any other energy source?
Yeah, we definitely have to have alternative energy source such as fission, solar power, wind power, because fusion still take 10 or 15 or 20 years. So until then, we have to alternative source, definitely. But at the same time, if we talk about energy, then there are 4 elements. One is stability, then safety, environment. I forgot. But anyway, so just several elements we have to think about. Then talking about fissions, is it actually safe or not? That's questionable. Fission.
Yeah.
Then also we have to think about nuclear non-proliferation issue. National security. So yeah, that's an issue. Then talking about solar power generation or wind, the stability could be the issue. Do we actually control the weather or not? Maybe it's difficult. So yeah, that's the reason.
Right. Okay, so but let's go into fission, for example. So in the case of fission, yes, it's not as safe as fusion, but it's what we have, and it's not that unsafe. I think a lot of the perspectives on fission is perhaps misguided. Where do you think fusion plays in a world where fission, for example, is actually relatively safe, or at least getting safer with existing technologies?
Yeah, so the energy transition, the climate crisis, the need to deeply decarbonize modern industry, those are really big problems. The idea that we will solve that problem with one solution that works everywhere for everyone is probably a bit naive. We're going to need all the solutions. And when you think about the act of putting power onto the grid, there's the national policy, but there's also the local policy of people that live next door. And while it's true that fission as a technology has actually a remarkably good safety record around the world, that doesn't necessarily going to sway the person that lives next to it. And so we need to make sure that we have options that people can choose from as we develop these energy sources. Because if we don't have the options, then we're suddenly up against a big problem of no energy versus someone that's very upset with the thing they have to live with in their region, their neighborhood. And so I often don't think of it as either or. I think of it as and. This is a $100 trillion energy transition. At that level, it is going to be very difficult no matter what we do. So let's do an and approach. And with fusion, as something that doesn't work yet today, you cannot buy a fusion power plant today, that's like, let's develop it. Yeah. And with things that do work today, let's deploy them where they're wanted and where they're accepted.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly my thought. I mean, I think, as an investor, but also as a citizen of the world, you really need to take a portfolio approach to this aspect. We don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. I think fission has been very successful. If you look at the U.S. Navy as an example, over 50% of the ships out on the sea are powered by fission, and they've had a extremely safe record around the world. And so I think is in the U.S., what is fission? About 18 to 20% of the base power load. As you try to reduce coal, you try to reduce fossil fuels. Solar and wind only make up for a component of it. And so you really have to start today, or actually yesterday, with fusion to be able to get there by, what are we saying, 2030, 2035, 2040, to have this online, to really be able to produce power for for everyone in the world.
Okay, so let's talk about time horizons then, right? So we were talking about 2030, 2040. I think Japan is 2050. We're aiming for. So, I mean, what timeline can we expect? What progress? What are we talking about when it comes to fusion? Bob, you want to tackle that?
Yeah. So, technology development takes some time, but it's also easy to convince yourself it will take forever, right? Today we live in a world where more and more things like AI are helping us, maybe scaring us, but doing lots of things.
Right.
And there was a time when we thought AI was 50 years away, and it suddenly became upon us. So we shouldn't be complacent when we think a technology takes a long, long time to develop. Instead, we should think of what is the range of possible outcomes. On one end in fusion, on one end of the spectrum on fusion, are large government programs where fusion has historically been funded. And they are looking at fusion power plants, the first ones on the grid, sometime maybe the 2050s. So still a ways out, but actually they've held that date for a while and it's getting closer. With the current set of companies, there's about 30 startup companies in fusion. Their timelines are looking like somewhere in the early 2030s, which isn't that far away. That's on a decadal timeline.
Why is that? Why 2030s?
And the why now piece of this is a combination of factors. One, the need. So as a capitalist looking at the energy transition, if you are in the 50s, then you miss. Mm-hmm. So the world needs it, and when the world needs something, the world can often do it quicker than previously thought. But I think also rolled into there is that the science has gotten very good. So we've seen recent announcements over the last year, 2 years, that are scientific achievements in fusion of long-sought goals, of actually creating these conditions inside machines on Earth for the first time. And that science is now getting to the point where it's predictive, meaning you can design a machine to cause that to happen, which when that transition occurs in a field, whether it's in aerospace designing planes or whether it's in DNA designing CRISPR, it opens up a range of possibilities. And you're seeing these companies take that science, combine new technologies that had not previously been applied in government-funded fusion programs that come from other areas of new materials, new AI, new ways to organize. Put those together with the capital from the energy transition and come up with unique approaches. And there's now a portfolio of those companies and approaches, and they're all settling in on roadmaps that we will see over the next 10 years whether or not they have what it takes. And it's a very exciting field.
So you mentioned progress, some of the milestones that we crossed in the past, I think you said 2 years. So last year in particular, there was a big announcement, Lawrence Livermore Lab, is that right?
LN.
So what exactly happened there? Why was it such a big leap forward? Kyoshi, do you want to tackle it? Okay. You look like you wanted to answer that.
Yeah, I'm a PhD plasma physicist, so I should
you've
probably
got that one.
About the plasma. So when you think about what is needed to make a fusion power plant, you can work backwards from the future. So in the future, it needs to be economical. That means we have to build a plant and it has to run enough and generate revenue as a product. Nobody is there. The next thing that happens before that is you need to make a product that sells power, that runs enough for someone to buy the power. Maybe the total return on the investment's not quite right. It maybe still needs some subsidies, but it's at least generating net electric. The step before that is you need to create the conditions in the plasma inside the machine that start to make more power of heat from that plasma than it took to heat it up. You need to light the star. You need to ignite the fuel. That condition of net energy or energy gain is what NIF, a laser-based fusion machine in California, very large government program, demonstrated just recently. It had been long sought, and we've had a history of getting to that point. And there are several machines that are now being built that are going to build on that to take the next step. Before that point of net energy, you have to get to the right sort of neighborhood of conditions. Very hot, like 100 million degrees. And this is one of the things that's very exciting. At that stage right now, there are now dozens of approaches that have reached those hurdles, some of which are in private companies. And so they're primed to run this race. And so we're seeing, a few people hit these milestones, but also a backlog of other things that could run that race.
Okay, so considering all these great milestones being crossed here and time horizons, right now it's 2023. Commercialization, you say, is going to be sometime in 2030. Beau, how do you look at it from a capitalist perspective?
Yeah, from a capitalist perspective, well, first of all, there's a pretty interesting report that's out. I think they surveyed 30 companies that are in the fusion realm, and they looked at, from their pipeline, when do they think they'll get to commercialization? When do they think they'll actually produce power? That was generally, I think 14 of them said between 2031 and 2035, and then similarly about 14 said that they'll get to economic viability at about the same time. And then the other ones were a couple of years after that. So it seems like people are converging kind of in that 2031 to 2035 timeframe. And then as an investor, this concept of having unbounded energy, I mean, this could be the market opportunity of really the century or of the universe, being able to capture this, putting in a fair amount of capital today with a fairly long runway. But if you can create one or two or three of some of the largest potential companies in the world, I think there's an amazing risk-reward opportunity here for the right investors.
So when are you going to place that bet?
We're still working on it. Look, so what we do a couple things. We do debt financing, we do equity financing, and we do growth as well. So we actually bank several companies in this realm. One of the gentlemen sitting next to me, we actually do bank. And then I think over time there will be a lot more equity investment in the category. And then over time you'll start to change out equity for debt to actually be able to build these facilities. So I think there will be an opportunity for big project financing opportunities down the road too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we are now talking about when fusion commercialization happened.
Right.
But looking back 3 years, we are just talking about if fusion. So the momentum is definitely shifting from if to when.
But are we in a hype cycle?
Yeah.
Could be.
Well, that is the question. By the way, I've placed a bet. So, and the reason that we placed a bet on Kyoto Fusioneering is because we don't know actually when fusion is going to be commercialized, when it's going to be viable. But what we liked about Kyoto Fusioneering is that they are basically selling the picks and shovels to the miners. So they're supplying the fusion companies. And we are making a bet that there's going to be more and more investment going into the fusion industry. And so that industry as a whole is going to get bigger. And therefore, Kyoto Fusioneering will actually generate revenue, whether or not there will be commercialization in 2030 or 2040. So it's kind of like a long-term bullish, but we're not sure when the commercialization is going to happen in the short to midterm. But with that in mind, Kiyoshi, I was hoping you can probably unpack the sort of like the why Japan angle. Like why is it that a global fusion leader is going to come out of Japan? There's a lot of unique things that I think we can sort of talk about.
Yes, looking at the global perspective of this fusion industry, definitely US, UK are leading this industry. But Japan is sitting this industry very uniquely. That is, one is the manufacturing supply chain. We do have manufacturing technologies, and that kind of support from big companies such as Mitsubishi, Toshiba, Hitachi, and also small and middle companies. They are supporting, first of all, ITER project. It's an international project. So they have a capability and technologies behind this fusion thing. So we can support any type of fusion reactor, such as Commonwealth or ITER or any. That's the uniqueness of Japan. As you can imagine, what happened for automobile industry, it's a big infrastructure and ecosystem. So we have ecosystem now, and how to leverage this ecosystem to the world, that's the uniqueness of Japan.
Right. And another thing that's interesting to know is that Japan, because they've had, you still now very high energy dependency, they've invested a lot in nuclear fission, And a lot of the great engineers are also based in Japan, right? So you have this combination of expertise in nuclear fission or nuclear, generally speaking, combine that with the manufacturing expertise, right? Are there any government-related initiatives that are unique to Japan, and perhaps we can kind of parlay that into some of the initiatives that we see in the U.S.? Kiyoshi, you want to go ahead?
I think actually maybe Bob can talk about what is happening in the United States and what is happening in the UK. Then, yeah.
Okay, and then we'll bounce on that. Go ahead.
Right. I think the point about the uniqueness of Japan highlights an important point about why governments are interested in fusion. So when you think about energy and you think about an industry for energy, one way to think about it is an extractive industry, right? Who sits on resources? Who sits on resources under the ground in terms of fossil fuels or from the sky in wind and solar? But fusion inverts that. The resource that matters is technology. Because if you can manufacture the fusion machine, you now are manufacturing effectively energy. And so that resets the struggle for resources geopolitically. It now becomes like who can think their way and organize their way to a technology. And that has corollaries in things like space. How do you build rockets? Right? Rockets aren't resources, rockets are technology. Automobiles, technology. And what we saw in the United States was that the United States harnessed the startup ecosystem to transform how we do rockets by doing SpaceX and orbital sciences. And they did that through a program that was a public-private partnership where the government said, we are interested in this existing, this being US-based. We will help companies that show they can do it. So if you launch a rocket, we will help pay for the rocket. But the risk is on you. You must be successful. And that program is the program that propelled SpaceX to be what it is today. Similar programs, the United States built Tesla based on loans. And we now see in the United States the launch of a similar program for fusion. So partnering with the national labs like Livermore and the academic ecosystem in the United States with about 25 startup companies, and now with programs that say, we as the government of the United States will help fund these projects up through demonstration. If you're successful, we'll be there to help you take the next step up. And that's all predicated on a bold decadal vision. The United States has said, we want to see a fusion power plant putting power on the grid, that third milestone in a decade. Similar to the UK, which has also said they want to do that as well. And so you see governments putting their head down and starting a bit of a race with programs and incentives to help.
True. So actually, US and UK are leading this, initiating these activities. So Japan, as I mentioned earlier, have technologies, capabilities, ecosystem, but not good at leading the industry or making the industry itself. That's how the government can support the industry itself, how to make the next industry, that's a fusion industry itself. That's the necessary support from the government, I believe.
Right. So what are they doing well, and what would you like to see happen in Japan?
It's quite a difficult question, right? Yeah. First one is the definitely policy making. So, but at the same time, we have to not just talking about fusion, but deep tech, hard tech. We have to open up our market, Japanese market, to the world. We are Galapagos Island now.
What does that mean, to open it up?
Open up means the liquidation of people, money, asset, everything. So circulation of people, such as big corporations to the startup, or to go to the other industry. Such kind of liquidation is necessary.
Right. So make it easier to let people go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, we have to open up the asset that held by the national laboratory or academia. Then if we can open up, the innovation will happen. gradually. Then also for money, big money is in the corporate side. But like this City-Tech Tokyo, we are trying to make the money into fusion, not only fusion, but a deep tech startup ecosystem. So liquidation is quite important. So that kind of policy making within ecosystem, that's the role of government, I believe.
Beau, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, this concept of public-private partnership, I think, is really important. Obviously, SpaceX, Tesla, but if you even go back further to like DARPANET in the beginning of the internet, in this idea that the government, as part of the common good for all, will aggregate, collect resources to do research to figure out if we can get to a basic study or we can get to a proof of concept to where then you can start to bring in private dollars, corporate dollars, investors, et cetera, and then you have skin in the game from everybody, and I think that helps really just get the ball rolling and then be successful over the long run.
Right. Okay, and then kind of extending the aperture to not just like government policy, but also geopolitics, right? So, Bob, you guys are using tokamak technology, and that's from Russia. And from my perspective, it seems like there's this sort of polarization where you have a lot of the research and technologies are bifurcating between, let's say, the Western world, which includes Japan in this case, and Russia and China. How do you see sort of the fusion industry evolving in that lens? Love to hear from either Kiyoshi or Bob.
Yeah, so fusion has been historically a means of international collaboration. And actually, since the 1950s, it's been a vehicle, even in the Cold War. So the tokamak is a product of the 1950 détente era right now that's the basic building block for all the governments, but it came from the Soviets. And this idea that we would work together internationally on things that are basic science or that could propel the whole globe, that's a beautiful idea. And that idea is strong in fusion. Internationally, there's a large project called ITER in the south of France that has basically the entire industrialized world participating in it. And so we don't want to, it would be a shame to lose that view for something that is a global shared knowledge base, the stars, on a planet that is globally sharing an atmosphere. So that first is like we should be open. This should remain an open and collaborative, not a nationalized or closed system. However, it is true that it is a product. It's a product that generates critical infrastructure. It's power. So we would expect there to be some lines emerging. It's probably the case that those lines will be similar to the lines that we see on the Chinese West lines. Right. So China is putting a lot of money now in fusion. I believe there was just an article published, paper recently in Japan on the large investments that China is making in this. And myself as a CEO of a US-based company, I do not anticipate selling a lot of fusion power plants in China in 10 years. But that's different than whether or not we should work together on shared things around safety, standards, and basic science.
Kiyoshi, you have anything to add?
Yes. So 20 years later, or 30 years could be, we're going to see the world with fusion and without fusion countries. So with fusion countries, they can create limitless energy. With just having technology, we can create limitless energy. But without fusion, that creates another geopolitical issues. So fusion has to be for everyone. Fusion can be deployed to every country without no nuclear proliferation. But at the same time, we have to deploy fusion, want to deploy fusion every countries. But at the same time, US, UK, Japan has technologies. So this will cause another trading issues. That kind of world we are foreseeing in the future.
So we're getting pretty far down the rabbit hole here. But for example, right now there's a big discussion about the semiconductor industry and how supply chains have been maybe a little bit too outsourced historically. And I'm wondering, are there going to be some kind of similarities in, for example, the fusion industry where you see these sort of like geopolitics playing a role and where you're sourcing things and who is actually collaborating with who? But it sounds like you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. I would say, of course. I think we learned a pretty tough lesson, kind of over COVID timeframe. Over the previous 10, 15 years, we've outsourced our abilities. I mean, not just semiconductors, and simple things like antibiotics. There's a lot of things that are no longer produced in country, and I think people are realizing that you actually want to have some ability to have that production capability yourself. And you're starting to see chip companies come to the U.S. and other countries realizing they need to have some of those core resources and those abilities, within country in case of situations like this. Now, I'm a huge fan of partnering and collaboration, and I think it's whether it's the International Space Station or fusion or a lot of these subjects, I think it does help pull countries together and work together, because I feel like in what I've seen over years, as if countries are isolated, typically a negative narrative is written, and then we have bad things happen. And I think by working together and being collaborative, you can keep the peace.
All right, Kyoshi, did you have something to add? No? Okay. All right. Okay, so going into sort of the next 5 years or so, what kinds of milestones do you see, I guess particularly Kyoshi, I'm curious to hear, milestones do you see on the Japan fusion front? So government is, they have a sort of like a thought group or a think group where I believe Koni Sensei is also part of that group. What kinds of things are in the works from a government policy perspective?
Yes. So the Kishida administration and the cabinet office is now very serious about fusion and to build a strategy of fusion, looking at the activities in the UK and the US, how to replicate that kind of program or activities. So they are under constructing the strategy for fusion. And it's going to be published this spring, could be April or May. So huge transition will occur, I believe. But at the same time, I think still some big movement is necessary for this Japanese fusion industry because they are following ITER. ITER is a big project, and we cannot fail this ITER project. So Japanese government cabinet office will definitely follow this path. But at the same time, we have to have another path for fusion commercialization because, again, we have technologies. So
right.
maybe...
So when you say ITER can't fail, what do you mean by that? Some would argue that it has failed.
Okay. So it's kind of a story between public, not against private, public with private. So public program cannot fail. Could be fail, but these are the kind of fundamental research, fundamental and applied research. Okay. So they should be keep going. So anyway, fundamental research, applied research, these are necessary. But now we are in the phase for commercialization or industrialization. So these ITER are still research development, and this is necessary. Like, for example, now SpaceX in the market, do we still need the NASA or JAXA? Definitely we need NASA. So there's some functional difference between the private and public program.
Coexist and do what they do best. Yeah. Bob, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, thinking through the evolution of a technology, like what we're seeing in fusion. I'm a history of technology person as a hobby. What you're seeing in fusion, I think, mirrors lots of other histories of technology, where you're seeing the first steps from what was, at one point, a speculative idea. In fusion's case, that was over 100 years ago, to what became a scientific curiosity, to what became a scientific discipline, to what became an applied program. And fusion has done all those steps. And now we're seeing the first steps to what becomes a commercial endeavor. And that happened for computers. That happened for flight. That happened for vaccines out of mRNA. That is a common thread. And when that happens, the research doesn't stop. It accelerates because now there's a market, there's a need, there's a testing ground for usefulness. And we're seeing now these public programs think through that transition where, yes, startups are by their nature risky endeavors. You cannot bet an entire government policy on a startup. That would be inappropriate. But if the startup works, you want to be there to take the option because that could accelerate. So that means strong public programs of research, things like ITER, but also strategies that have the option, that follow and incentivize the startups and help them take their risks in a thoughtful way on the hope that we could break out sooner. And that recipe in Japan, UK, US, could be as big of a story 5 years from now as the NIF shot.
Right. So we'll need a sort of Cambrian explosion of many different innovations, kind of players working together. So with that in mind, we're kind of running short on time here. If either of you could have, let's say, like a magic wand where you could change the fusion industry, and you can't say that anything like, okay, fusion's commercially viable now. Aside from that, what would you change? We'll start with you, Kiyoshi.
Sorry again. Could you please?
If there was something that you could change about the fusion industry with a magic wand, what would you do? Or whoever wants to take it first.
Your call. You're the technical one.
I think there's an education component, right? Technologies can only go so fast as the people can understand them, whether that's the workers, the policymakers, the neighbors. And we live in a time when things can go very fast, and that can be scary. And we don't want fusion to be scary because it's fast. We want fusion to be something that people take the time to understand, and so forums like this are really important. It's also true that I'd love to have give me 100 fusion-trained engineers, because it's a new discipline. We're not training those people at nearly the rate that we will need to, and it takes time for that to happen. But this idea that how do we get fusion sort of educated across all the different stakeholders involved, I'd love to be able to fix that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I would say is I would like to see more startups. I think there are a good number, but 30 is still small.
It's small, yeah, it's small.
It's small.
Yeah,
when you
that
think,
important of an industry.
When you think about the dollars that go into venture capital and startups across all different sectors and categories, there aren't that many startups truly in the fusion world. So I think if we could change that, it brings more optionality to the table over time.
Right, and I guess that's education, awareness, right, and also talent, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yoshi, have you thought about your answer?
Yes, same. Public awareness would be the most important for now for fusion.
Awareness.
Yeah, awareness. Because once people here know about fusion, maybe they show some interest. Then they will come to our industry. They will be educated by. They learn a lot about fusion. So if investors know about fusion, they will put money. So we have to increase awareness. Then politicians also, if they know about fusion, they will be very supportive. So awareness may change everything.
All right, thank you.
So.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah. And I guess we go to the